People are always asking me, Scotty, what do you think of the Honda CR-V SUVs? Well, here's a 2002 with a lot of mileage. As you can see, it's got 187,612 miles. Still starts right up. Typical Honda engine, well-made engine. Still has a smooth transmission. And the interior is pretty much Honda. It's utilitarian. As you can see, the back seat's down. You got a lot of space, one of these things to haul stuff. And this is a fancy one. It's even got a moonroof, sunroof, whatever you want to call it. Now this is a fancy real-time four-wheel drive. And even though it's got all their mileage on it, closing in on 200,000 miles, the system has performed flawlessly for the customer. The engine itself, 4-cylinder engines. They got plenty enough power for this vehicle, but they're no racehorses. So they do not burn the automatic transmissions out. The Hondas and Acuras that I see having problems generally are the V6 engines. They put out a lot of horsepower, they strain the automatic transmissions and the four-wheel drive systems, so I often see Acuras and Honda's transmission problems with the big V6 engines. This 4-cylinder puts out 160 horsepower, which is plenty enough to pull this vehicle around, but it's not putting too much torque on the transmission to burn the things out. Hence, it's got almost 200,000 miles, and the transmission and the all-wheel drive system has never had a problem. And the basic transmission, practical 4-speed Honda automatic transmission. Honda makes and designs them themselves, and these have very few problems when they're hooked up to one of these 4-cylinder engines. And yes, it's not that great on gas because it's a 4-wheel drive system. 20 in the city, and about 24 on a highway. So it's not great on gas mileage, but they can run forever. To compare this all-wheel drive Honda CR-V to, say, a comparable 2002 Subaru all-wheel drive. Subaru's making all-wheel drive for a really long time. They get them pretty perfected. The Subaru Boxer engines have a tendency of blowing head gaskets. They'll rarely be running as good as this Honda is with almost 200,000 miles on it. And they also have automatic transmission problems in the Subaru. The Honda makes a better automatic transmission than Subaru does. Now this thing may be 18 years old, but it's still got the original air conditioning compressor. Now, as you can see here, the power steering pump is starting to leak a little. That's typical on most Hondas. You can just add the fluid every once in a while. If it gets to a point where it leaks out all the time, you're going to have to replace the pump. But as you can see, at least the pump's on the top. It's a very easy job. It's almost as if Honda knew, well, our pumps leak when they get old, so let's put them on the top so they're real easy to change. Some cars, man, it could take you 3-4 hours to get that pump off. This thing, take you 10 minutes. See what it looks like under there. If anything's really badly leaking or bent or broken, we'll start looking around. And aside from power steering fluid dripping down, which you already know, the brakes are clean, the frame all looks fine. And when we check the back side, boots are all nice and clean, not ripped. You can see the frame is all solid, not bent. Everything is pretty much original equipment. Hey, it's still got the original muffler on. You know, they make good aluminized mufflers. It's got a little surface rust there, but it still hasn't rotted through, and it's 18 years old. And the left rear tire's wearing normally, got tons of tread. Same thing, it's clean with no weird wear spots. And the front tires, now they're a bit worn here. You can see there's a little bit of scalloped wear here. So it probably needs a front end alignment on this side. Then we'll go to the other side, check that out. And we got the same thing, a little bit of wear. It needs front tires on an alignment for sure. But I'd expect that with a car that's got almost 200,000 miles on it. That's just typical wear and tear. You don't put a car down because of that. Rubber wears out over time. And as your tires start to get thinner, you will get an accentuation of odd wear. You get 40-50,000 miles out of a set of tires and then they start showing wear. Most cars are going to do that because they're not perfect when they're that old. Let's say you put a pair of new tires on this thing and they within a few thousand miles started to wear out, then you know you really got some front end problems. They're going to have to be looked into. In this case, not so, as we'll show in a road test. We'll start her up and back it up. Transmission engaged perfectly. Okay, we'll give it a little gas and see what happens. Got decent acceleration, shifts good. As we turn, it's a little low on fluid. And we know it's leaking, so it's gonna have to be replaced at some point in time, but we'll just add fluid for now. And it's got a little bouncing when you hit bumps, but hey, they always ride a little bit on the rough side, and as they age, of course the struts are all worn, but hey, it's totally controllable. It's not like it's an uncontrollable vehicle. I've had customers over the years say, oh, it's got all this mileage, I want to put struts on it, and they do, and then they're disappointed because they find out, and maybe it rides 10% better, not all that much. If they're not worn out and making all kinds of noise and shaking at the highway, you can live with an old vehicle like this. But like an old workhorse, you're not going to take it to do the 100-yard dash anymore. You can baby a little. Make it last as long as possible. Now I'm going to scan it to get an overall perspective of what kind of shape it's in with all this mileage. Now it's doing its thing, reading everything. And it has a code P0420 CAT system efficiency below threshold. Very typical for these old Hondas. As they age, any impurities in the system can start to clog up the catalytic converter, and it's not as efficient as it used to be. It's a combination of everything. The engine being worn, the fuel injectors being worn. It only does this when it reaches a certain parameter. So, a lot of times, you can put cleaner in a gas tank to help clean the catalytic converter, go to a higher grade of gasoline, and drive it around for a couple hundred miles. A lot of times, the code will go away because they'd help clean it. Better burning fuel is going to make it work more efficiently. But this thing runs perfectly fine. The customer's got no qualms about how it runs. They were just wondering why the check engine light was coming on. And that's why. So I'm going to throw some cleaner in a gas tank and tell her, drive it around for a couple hundred miles. Then bring it back. Let me recheck it then. Now, I've had customers drive them years that way. I even had one customer with a CRV 4 years in a row, the inefficient catalytic converter. And then it came the 5th year to have me check it out, and inexplicably, the code was gone. And I said, what, did you put a catalytic converter on it? They said, no, we didn't do anything. We just switched the gas. And the gas station by us went out of business, so instead of buying it from an Exxon station, we're now buying it at a Shell station. So the only thing I could figure was, well, the Shell gasoline burnt better than the Exxon did, and since it burnt better, the catalytic converter did not have to work as hard to get rid of on-burn hydrocarbons, and the light went off, and it stayed off for the next 3 years until he sold the car. It was still off. So things like that can happen. The 2018 Civic SI. Oh, the die-hard fans say, I'm going to get a Civic Type R. It's racing, it's screaming. This is a Civic SI. It's the baby brother. Got a good deal? Paid 26 grand. I got customers with Civic Type R's. Guess what? They were 38 grand and above, depending on what they added on it. Is it really worth the difference? Would you be happy with one of these? This Civic SI has 208 horsepower. That's a lot of horsepower for a little car. Certainly not as the Type R. But how fast do you really want to go? This engine under the hood, only over 200 horsepower. This thing goes 138 miles an hour. If you get a Civic Type R, yes, it tops out at 170 miles an hour. But how often are you going to be driving 170 miles an hour? Yes, at a racetrack and things like that, but understand, if you're going to be driving those kinds of speeds, you're going to have to buy special racing tires. They're going to last like 500-600 miles and wear out, and you need new tires. You got to think about all that stuff. Plus, this SI has very comfortable seats, as you can see. You fit in nice. They're very comfortable. If you can find a Civic Type R at a dealer, sit in it. And sit in an SI. And you'll see, just to begin with, these seats are much more comfortable in the SI. And this SI does have a sport mode that makes the suspension very tight. But even the owner admits he does that when he's driving like a maniac, so it handles better. For normal riding, he doesn't use it because it's just too rough. If you got a friend with a Civic R, take it for a ride. And you would be amazed at how rough the ride is. You can drive this thing every day. Honda Civics, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 miles, they're still rolling down the road. This thing can last a long time. You take the special suspension in this. You can ride normal, you can put it in sport. But it's a Honda. What's Honda known for? Reliability. If you saw my video on the mid-engine Corvette, it had the sport suspension, luxury suspension, and when you put it on sport, it was really stiff and handled like a dream. And when you put it on the touring mode, it was soft like an old Cadillac. But it's a GM product, not known especially for quality. And guess what? On that Corvette, each individual strut costs over $1,400 just for the part. A lot of money. You know they're gonna break over time. I've seen Honda Civics, couple 100,000 miles, still had the original suspension on them and rode okay. It's a different ball game. Now, if you like handling, you'll like these low profile tires. But let me warn you something about low profile tires. There's not much give. Take a regular tire like on my wife's Lexus. a lot of the rideability is the sidewall flexing. And this is the worst thing. Damage. Okay? The owner isn't an idiot who doesn't know how to drive and smashed into a curb. He did not hit a curb. He was driving in Gatlinburg, and there was a giant pothole that he couldn't avoid. So he had to drive through it. Low profile tires go through a pothole, bang! You can bend those rims. And these rims aren't cheap. A set of 4 of these factory rims is $2,600. So low profile tires, you know, that's up to you. They do handle like a dream, but you drive in roads that have problems, it's going to cost you money. And for a high performance tire, the tires themselves are not that bad, but they're still 240 bucks a piece. Hey, on my old Celica, I paid like $60 a piece for mine, and they're still going down the road. He put the Type R fins on it to make it look a little snazzier, but even the stock look of this car is pretty cool. Compare this to an old Civic. Yeah, quite a bit difference in how they look. Now, realize that yes, this is a 1.5 liter Earth Dreams engine, and people have recorded problems of oil dilution, that gasoline is getting by the piston rings and getting in the oil. And as you can see here, a turbocharger. This little bitty 1.5 liter engine puts out over 200 horsepower. Now, this is the original owner. He's got like 34,000 miles. It doesn't burn any oil. He hasn't had any problem. But Honda has extended the warranty on these things for 6 years of unlimited mileage. Rarely does anyone give unlimited mileage. So you could drive this thing 300,000-400,000 miles if you wanted the first 6 years. And if the engine broke, guess what? They're gonna have to fix it for free. You really can't argue that if you're gonna do a lot of long distance driving. It's a good idea to change your engine oil a lot. Personally, I wouldn't listen to any of the nonsense that the manufacturers have. If I owned one of these cars, which I don't because I'm too cheap to buy a late model car, but if I did, I would change the oil every 4,000 or 5,000 miles using full synthetic oil. Now you have to use full synthetic oil in any of these modern engines because that's the only type of oil that can be 0W20. A conventional motor oil can't be made with 0W, so it's got to be synthetic oil. And if you own any of these engines, especially a Honda, my advice is always use that new GF6A oil. It was designed for these engines, and it came out in like March of this year. You don't have to buy it from any particular company. It's a brand of oil, generic brand. It's not a specific brand. It has to meet certain specifications so the timing chains don't wear, the bearings don't wear, and it doesn't have the problem with the oil dilution. It only costs a little bit more. Yeah, when it first came out, of course, it was really expensive. Like everything new costs too much, but now a bunch of companies make it. So just make sure you get the GF6A oil that you're going to use in one of these engines to stop the problem and change it more than normal. There's no way that I would own one of these and change it every 10,000 miles. I'd max out at 5,000 miles. Hey, engine oil, cheap compared to engines. Engines cost a lot of money, oil doesn't. Just change the oil more often, that's all. In a place like Alaska where it's 40, 50 below, yes, you want to warm the engine up and then drive a little while. You wouldn't want to get in it, drive to the convenience store and come back, and that's all the driving you do. You'd want it to fully warm up so it can evaporate any of the gasoline fumes that get in the oil. All that stuff will be boiled out if you drive it at a high enough speed for a long enough time. Maybe 15, 20 minutes is all it needs, but you don't want to buy one of these and drive it, 2-3 miles a day. That's not a smart idea. How does it run? Well, let's check it out. If you listen, you will hear a noise. That is the low profile tires. They handle well, but they are noisy. If you don't mind the noise, you don't care, but they're noisy tires. As we round this curve, we'll see how it takes off. Give it a little bit of gas. It's got plenty of zip to drive around in. I mean, I see no reason you need to go more than 139 miles an hour. And believe me, if you go back, watch that video I made with my customers, it was riding like a sleigh on dry pavement. Bangity, bangity, bang. This does not ride like that. You can use it as an everyday driver. Now, of course, being a Honda Civic on the highway, took a trip to Atlanta, got like 40 miles a gallon. They get phenomenal gas mileage. They're a logical car, but this one is also a fun car, but not too insane. Now, realistically speaking, the Type R is only rated at 28 miles a gallon on the highway. And only a really conservative driver is going to get that, and that's not the type of person who buys the Type R. And the R really means racing. They're made for racing. They're not made as an everyday driver. If you want the best compromise, you want to have some fun, you want to get good gas mileage, you want something that's going to last a long time, hey, it's a pretty good choice. A 91 Honda Prelude sports car. They made them for quite some time. You look at the early ones, man, they were ugly. This, much better looking. And then if you ask me, as they went on, they became kind of nondescript. In the end, they were pretty much just Honda Accords rebadged, similar body style. But when they were making these, they were still a sporty car. Now, of course, the problem with this car is it's a northern car. So, this is one reason you don't do Bondo on a car. It doesn't hold up. Now, as the owner knows, in England they make kits where you can get a whole sections, cut them off, weld them on, and repaint them. That's the only way to really fix it. Bondo, you gotta cut it off, put new metal in. But they make kits for them, the English especially. They're nuts about sports cars. They got a lot of kits and stuff you can buy relatively cheaply. Now, he bought it 6 years ago for $3,600 before coronavirus. There's a lot of stuff around. It had 100-something thousand miles on it, but it's a Honda, and they can last a long time. Like I said, the main problem with this is it's a northern car, and they will rust. If this was a Texas car, it'd be another story. But it's a northern car, so you got to live with what you got. Real selling points of these, of course, were the engines and transmission. As you can see, all the real ones come with a manual transmission. This one's a 5-speed. And we look under the hood, you see the main reason people buy them. They're just kind of whining because this is a non-VTEC engine. He'd rather have the VTEC one, but they're really hard to find. Inline 4, it's a very good engine, but of course it's not the VTEC, so it doesn't have the oomph that the VTEC did. Honda really was the first manufacturer to super mass produce VTEC systems to get more power. They got a lot of power out of smaller engines, but at the same time they were extremely dependable. Now, if you want to go into the history of it, one of these Italian companies were the first ones to make it, but of course they would blow up all the time. This thing's a 91. It still runs pretty good. You're not going to find it with an Italian car. The Japanese pretty much perfected it. So it's got 151,000 miles on it now. But, you know, it still runs pretty good. Now, the owner admitted it burns a small amount of oil, maybe a quart every 3,000-4,000 miles. And of course, if you get on it and drive like a maniac, it will burn more oil. We had a customer back in Lewiston, New York when I was a kid in the 60s. He had an SS Chevy and it ran okay. But when he really went on it, he'd burn 2 or 3 quarts of oil in a night when he was really getting on it. But if he drove it normally, I'd only go through a quart every 800-900 miles. But you push an engine and it's going to burn a little bit of oil. As you can see, this is when, as far as I'm concerned, they started to ruin cars in the United States because they got all the plastic bumper stuff. You know, I liked them when they had real bumpers. EPA mandated crash and stuff, so I liked them better when they had chrome bumpers on them. But that's the way they made these things. Now, they never made convertibles with these things, but the sunroof comes up pretty far up. You can see it's kind of rusting away. Like I say, this is a northern car. Now we'll start it up, make sure it's in neutral, and away we go. And being an older Honda with a lot of miles, there's some ticking going on. That's totally normal for these. Now, you can adjust the valves. They need to be adjusted every so often. But even if you just adjust them, you're still going to hear noise because it's just worn, and you're going to hear a little bit of lifting noise on it. That's totally normal for one of these things. And you can see it had the radiator replaced. Hey, they replaced it with a metal one. That's a smart move, right? That's the one advantage of Hondas. Even though they didn't sell all that many Preludes, so many parts are interchangeable with the Accords that they sold millions of them. The big advantage of this is it may be old, but it's fuel injected. That's got a distributor. It's not a distributorless system. It's got an old-fashioned distributor, so it's easier to work on, but it's fuel injected. I'll tell you one thing about the Preludes is, unless you like spending half your life messing with carburetors, never, ever buy one of those Honda Preludes that's got dual carburetors on them, because those dual K-ins are absolutely hellacious things to work on, to keep in tune. The best thing they ever did to the Prelude was put fuel injection. Now, I'm gonna go back way in history when Honda was making those N600s and then 800s. All right, They once made a little bitty 4-cylinder engine, and that baby had 4 Cayenne carburetors on it. And to boot that off, each wheel had a chain drive sealed system that made it go. They were low production sports cars. These are high production sports cars. They made enough of these, not like the little earlier ones where they were pretty much very limited production. They wanted to make little bitty sports cars. They were kind of making them look like English sports cars. This was their own design. They handle well. They evolved through a bunch of different generations. Like I say, the last generations, they're kind of just like a squashed down Honda Accord. To me, they kind of ruined the car, just like Ford with a Thunderbird. They started out as sports cars, then they ended up in these big, ugly, just didn't have any power, or ugly looking. You know, the early ones, nice sports cars. And this being kind of in the middle, it's still a sports car. The later ones, I'm not such a big fan of. That's probably one of the reasons they don't make them anymore. They made them so ugly that guys who wanted sports cars are like, this doesn't look like a sports car. It's just a Honda Accord. But at the same time, if you do buy a late model one, let me warn you something. The late model ones are hard to get parts for, because even though they're kind of like Honda Accord, a lot of parts are different. I had a guy in Houston bought one. I couldn't get an air conditioning compressor for it because it was different than the Accord. I could get the Accord ones like that. So with his, he kept buying rebuilt ones. I said, don't buy rebuilt air conditioning compressors. They're garbage, right? But we couldn't find a new one because the Prelude was different than the Accords. So realize there are parts on the later model ones. You're gonna have a hard time getting parts for them. I wouldn't go out and pay a bunch of money for one, because you're gonna find out you're gonna have an endless money pits looking for parts, and sometimes find out I can't even get new parts. I gotta get either junkyard parts or reman parts. It's not a good position to be in. Now as we look inside, this is why I tell people, cloth seats, hey, these are 91s. They're still in pretty good shape. Yeah, there's a tear here from getting in, they all do that, but if these had been leather seats, forget it. They'd be all tattered and torn to shreds. As we go inside, even though they're old, these are comfy seats for zooming around in. And even though it's old, it's got digital dash. Of course, digital was in those days, right? Some of it's digital, some of it isn't. He's changed the stereo, the Honda stuff stinks. He put a Kenwood in, or one of the previous owners did. Nice size steering wheel with a good grip. And yes, it does have power windows. It's got 158,768 miles on it. And it's a Honda, so it may be 91, but the AC still works. Yes, it does. So, of course, parts have been changed. You can see it's got a remanufactured alternator on it. Down there, still looks like it's got the original air conditioning compressor, too. These things are well made. If you saw that video I made years ago where I bought one of those original Hondas that they brought in, those little cars with the 595cc motorcycle engine. They've gone a long way from that. And if anybody ever wants to know what happened to that, well, guess what? I gave up, because you can't get parts for those old ones. I couldn't get cylinder heads. The only thing I could get was a head gasket. That was it. I couldn't get a carburetor. It didn't have a brake system. I couldn't get a brake master cylinder. You can't get parts for those old N series. You just can't get parts for them. Now I know a lot of guys like souping them up. They'll put 750 Honda motorcycle engines and stuff in them, and it's totally doable. But I wanted to keep it stock, and considering that the body was all rotted away and the engine was locked up, the guy said it wasn't, but it was, I just sold it on to a guy for what I paid for it, 500 bucks. Then later he sold it on to somebody else, and I don't know what happened since then. But if you're ever going to mess with one of those early ones, get one that isn't rotten, and probably throw a Honda motorcycle engine in it, a modern engine, not the engine that it came with, because you can't get parts. They were underpowered. Better with a modern Honda motorcycle engine. So let's take it for a spin. Now we're going down the road and for a little sports car. Hey, it still rides pretty good. Honda's always made cars for driving, and they have better suspension systems than the Toyotas do, so they're a lot more fun to drive around. You take comparable cars to these back in the days, you get in the little Toyota sports cars, those rear-wheel drive ones they made, they don't handle like this thing. Now, as you can see, it may be an old car, but check it out. It doesn't shake at all. Honda knows how to make engines. No shaking at all, as old as it is. Now we're going to see what this thing can do. It's a fun little car to drive. It's up and goes. Too bad it doesn't have a VTEC though. It'll get up and go even faster. An oldie, but a goodie. This thing still runs quite well. 91, that's an old car, right? But it's a Honda. Yeah, they don't make Preludes anymore. They're kind of out of the sports car business, other than the Honda Civic Type R, which is a little bitty race car, right? The Preludes, they made them for a long time. There's a bunch of them out there. You don't want to get rusted out ones. And if you're a Zoom Zoom fan, you'll be happier with the VTEC engine. But this non-VTEC one, it's still going strong. Fun to drive around. And you don't have to spend that much money on it if you can find one that isn't rotting away. But like I say, if you find one that's all rotting away, walk away, because if it's rusted and it's coming apart, all that stuff starts rusting, you don't want to buy something like this. Now this one, hey, it's more or less superficial. The body's okay underneath. It's just all these fender flares and stuff going. You can cut them out. The rest of it's still pretty solid. Even though it's lived in Jersey forever, this thing's old. Even in Jersey, it doesn't need any kind of inspections now. So you don't have to deal with the crooks taking your money, telling you, well, you gotta spend $1,200 if you want your car to get registered. Nah, you don't have to worry about it. It's under the Old Car Act, so you can drive it and do whatever you want to it. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.